In this lecture, we're going to finish the very end of reproductive system, and then also start chapter 29, especially the development part. In last week, when we introduced female and male reproductive system, we also summarized there's a lot of homologs. Right? There are homolog structures, there are parallel functions of the gonad and generating, the gametes, right? So they are both made out of the gonads and as well as a duct system. And so, today we're going to look at how during the development, right, the female and the male reproductive system are developed, right? So during embryo stage, so that is anytime, right, before 7th week. So if we're looking at week 5 to 6, that's a sexually indifferent stage. That means there's no difference in the developing embryo between a male embryo and a female embryo. So you actually see this structure. So you have the gonad, right, that's going to develop from this genital ridge here. So this is developing embryo, doesn't take the full shape of a human shape yet. And that's going to develop into a gonad, genital ridge, right? Then right next to the genital ridge, then you have two sets of ducts. The first duct is called mesonephric duct. So that's the one right next to the genital ridge. Then you have a parallel mesonephric duct, right? So that's a little bit more distal, right, from the genital ridge. So two sets of ducts, mesonephric and paranephric, paranesonephric duct. And so both sets of the ducts is going to eventually, so you'll have the kidney right next, developing kidney right next, right next to it, and then both of those sets of ducts is going to come out, going to actually connected to the external, of the embryos at this place called cloaca. And so there's no difference. But then starting at about 7th week, during the development, right? And then you start to see the differentiation between the male and the female. Default development, that means if there's no sex determining genes expressed from the Y chromosome, right? So then you are going to end up with a default. Because XX, right? You do not have a Y chromosome, so you are going to develop this way. So the mesonephric duct is going to actually degenerate it, and then you are going to end up with a further development of the paramesonephric duct, forming the uterine tube, right? And then it's going to actually then you have the kidney, and going to be further developed linked to the urinary bladder, right? And then so they are going to form two separate ductal systems essentially. So the urethral, right, is going to develop separately from the vagina is going to develop further from the uterus, right, going to form separately. And so that you end up going to be two external kind of orifices to the external in the female urinary and reproductive system. So that's how the female development is going to be. And in the male system, because of the Y chromosome going to express genes, right, on the Y chromosomes, then you have those are the sex determining the male sex reproductive system development. So you're going to actually having the mesonephric ducts degraded. And instead, you are going to actually have the further development of the mesonephric ductal system. And so that's going to be the one, right, going to be connected to the developing gonads, then it's going to develop into testes, right, the afferent ducts and epididymis, and as well as the ductal system, right, all going to develop from this mesonephric duct, and then it's going to actually fuse, right, with the urethral coming out of the urinary bladder. And so they're going to share a urethral, large part of the urethral, and there's going to be only one orifice going to the external surface of the body. And so this is, it becomes apparent during week 10 to 12, but the phenotypic sex, so the appearance of different reproductive system, only start to be apparent at around 7th week. But this is all internal structure, right? Whether you have the further development of the mesonephric duct or the paranephric duct system, it's all inside of the pelvic, developing a pelvic cavity. Externally, you still cannot see much difference even at week 10 to 12. Here is a further, development of the reproductive ducts, right? Just, you saw the week 10 to 12 here, and then at birth, how those ductal systems are further developed. So at birth, you can see the female testes descend into scrotum, become lower, right? And then in the females, you have the further development of the vagina. But that's all internal, right? And how, even though the phenotypic sex, the organ, sex organ reproductive system become apparent after week 7, but that's internal, then how about the external? When do we still do we start to see a difference external in terms of the external sexual organs? Well, why do we care? Because we know, during the, development, during pregnancy, at a certain stage, roughly it's usually about week 20, the ultrasound can actually see whether it's a boy. That's probably the earliest time they could tell you whether it's a boy or a girl, right? That's because the ultrasound actually can detect the external genitalia, right? At week 6, external genitalia looks exactly the same. There's no difference. At week 12, right, even 10 to 12, internally you start to have differential development of the duct system, but then externally they look still quite similar. You have the developing, the external genitalia quite similar, right? Then so that's basically the homologous of our the structures in the reproductive system. You have the clitoris, is basically homologous to the glands of penis, right? You have labia minora, that's homologous to the penis, and then labia majora homologous to the scrotum, right? And then only at about week 20, you have the further development of the penis, and you have regression of the, basically the clitoris going to be developed more internally, right? So you start to see the separation, differentiation between the external genitalia. And so even though they start from the same primordial structures, right, then at about week 20, you can you can clearly differentiate them, right? This is week 20 in the pregnancy, not after birth. So after we talk about, when the during development, right, how the internal reproductive system as well as external genitalia become developed differentially, then a lot of times you can see this common theme of compare and contrast, right, between the female and male reproductive system. So we're going to do this again in another stage of the development. That will be aging, right? So aging, you have aging of the reproductive system in both female and males. Even though female, menopause, that is actually stop the menstrual cycle, right? That's menopause, and that's all the people know about it. But then less focus has been on the male aging. That would be called, the term would be male climacteric. So be familiar with those. Those are essentially talking about the same phenomenon, right? But then they have different presentation in male and female. Okay, let's look at female first. Well, the definition of menopause is the pause of menstrual cycle or stop, the cease of the menstrual cycle for a year, and it's not pregnant, right? Then what does it mean? That means the gametes stopped maturing, right? The gametes are the secondary oocytes. And if the gametes stop maturing, then you do not have, then the gametes are the second oocytes, do not have follicle developing, maturing, and follicle are the production of your, follicles are the ones that producing estrogen and progesterone, right? So then you are going to that menopause is going to correspond to a reduction in the estrogen and progesterone. But because this stop of the cycle is sudden, so then you have this reduction is also sudden and deep, the reduction in the hormone levels. And so then the symptoms, then you would have the females going through menopause, going to be having, hot flashes, thinning of scalp hair, and some other atrophy, right, of the reproductive organs. Hot flash is probably a main one. You guys know what you have heard about it, right? Guess what? In the male climacteric, the male the symptoms of that can also include hot flashes. Okay, so but then that's similarity, right? You're going to have decreased, male's going to have decreased sex drive, mood swings. Sounds familiar, right? Mood swings actually is also one of those characteristics in the menopause. I forgot to put it there, but mood swings definitely is associated with hormonal change, but also maybe hot flashes and sweating episodes. So this part is actually quite similar, right, as the ones in female. But the difference part is the male, even though is going through a declining, right, of the hormone levels, testosterone level also decreases, but that reduction is gradual, not sudden and steep. And the males continue to produce gametes. Maybe the numbers are lower, right? But then the numbers are lower, they are still constantly churning up sperms. Versus the females, when the menstrual cycle stops, that means there's no gametes going to be mature and produced, right? So this is the contrast part, the different part. So be familiar with those two terms. Be familiar with the similarities, but also the difference between the aging of male and female reproductive system. And that's all for the chapter 28.